Good evening, everyone. We're back with you, and I honestly can't remember the last time we spoke because time is just, I don't know, there's a time theft fairy at work most of the time. But anyway, we're back, and we're just talking before we came on about what exactly we should cover because there is, of course, so much going on from the Trump flip-flopping. Now he's backed off on the invasion of Iran. He put out a nice little diagram the other day of all of the routes for the invasion of Iran, and now thanks to apparently UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, he's decided to back down. I'm sure it had nothing to do with his trip to China. I'm really not sure what happened on his trip to China because the Chinese are being, in their statements, the usual, I guess, very inscrutable commentary, nothing much. I mean, a big thing has been made of the apparent threat over Taiwan. And I have to say that Trump in his Fox News interview was definitely backtracking on Taiwan and sort of saying, it's 9,500 miles away. Why should we back up a bid for independence from such a small, insignificant place, basically? But, who knows? That could change in the next 24 hours, depending on the next person that he talks to. And I have to say that the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar are not going to get Trump or Israel to back down from aggression. So, again, this is all just smoke and mirrors, really, to distract from what's really going on. And at the same time, Iran, of course, is preparing for war. There are training sessions going on now with citizens within Iran in using a gun, in knowing how to dismantle and clean a gun, particularly for women. Lebanon, it goes on and on. The Israeli army has just delayed the majority, I think 70 to 80% of their military operations. They've delayed them until nighttime because during the day, they're getting hammered by the Hezbollah FPV zones. And of course, what are they doing in response? They're lashing out against medics, ambulance drivers, workers, civilians, families, schools, residential areas, the usual thing, exactly what we saw them do in Gaza. But actually on the ground, Hezbollah are doing more than holding their ground. They're actually preventing much of the military advance on the ground. Syria is just descending into more insanity, where the niqab, wait for it. So Iran has been demonized for how many? Well, 40 years basically, for the hijab, which isn't even worn by many people, as you know, Fi, in Tehran and in many of the big cities. But now, under Al Qaeda, the niqab is being brought into schools and public places, and there are signs now on buses that are recommending that women wear the niqab. There's a whole PR campaign. And I have to say, the niqab is far more restrictive than wearing the hijab or just putting a scarf on your head in Iran. So this is a government that the West brought to power in Syria. Whereas the government, of course, that they're targeting in Iran, they're claiming that they basically restrict women's rights. And yet here in Syria, the government that they brought into control Syria is effectively absolutely eradicating the secular nature of Syria and women's rights. So that's just a very brief sort of runaround of this side of the world. But I wanted to slightly focus on Latin America and the work that you've been doing on really the Zionist expansionism into Latin America. Of course, they're expanding pretty much everywhere, from Cyprus through to the Sahel to Uganda to Mali, etc. It's pretty much I won't say an unstoppable wave, but it's a very powerful expansionist campaign that they're running at the moment. So let's talk. I don't know where you want to start, really. Do you want to start in Peru, or where do you want to go from?
Let's start in Peru because now it's official. You have the a fight against, between the left indigenous type of government which is
Mm.
prevalent, of course, in this region, in the Andean region, versus the right-wing U.S.-backed Zionist uh, perspective. And that is official now. Roberto Sanchez Palomino, who is pro-Palestinian outright, has been vocal about indigenous rights, changing the constitution, and freeing Pedro Castillo, who was the legitimate
Mm.
president that was couped, has passed to the next round. He is neck and neck with Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of the dictator Alberto Fujimori, who is far right and US backed and very much in that right wing Zionist mentality. So you have that going on. The election is coming up on June 7th. So that's going to be the final election. It is set to be tumultuous. It is two dominating different ways of thinking, one that takes into consideration the indigenous heritage of Peru, the rural, more, I would say, the affectionate for the earth, for people, for
Mm-mm.
human life, versus the very much big business, multinational corporations selling the resources out into
Yeah.
big business. And that's what she represents. So you have that going on in terms of the political aspect of Peru. And in terms of the uh, what's happening with the Zionist takeover, we know that Malay has pushed the Isaac Accords with Netanyahu. We know that there was an agreement. And the Isaac Accords, of course, are bringing Israel into Latin America. We know that that's the main goal, particularly starting with Argentina. There's been the selling off of land, the massive immigration of Zionists into Argentina. But the problem is that in the Andean region, there's been a long time connection between the Palestinian people and the people of the Andean region, the indigenous people, the Aymara, the Quechua. Not just a connection in terms of spirit and resistance, but also in terms of the fact that there's a Palestinian diaspora that settled there
Mm.
a long time ago in this region. And I'm talking about the Cusco region, the Pasac region. Well, in the last few years, but especially in the last few months, we have seen an influx of Israelis coming in and taking over that region, not just buying up land, which has outpriced many of the locals, but also buying businesses and enacting their businesses and demanding rights to have demonstrations and all sorts of things that are making people very, very uncomfortable. And in the context of that, that does seem like a continuation of the Isaac Accords when you think about the buying up of land. And so it's been kind of a sad irony that you have a lot of the, once again, the Palestinian diaspora, indigenous people to, of course, the Andes, experiencing what they feel like is at the very least an infringement upon their land by these foreigners that have decided to settle there, at least for the time being. And they're extremely uncomfortable, extremely vocal about this discomfort. There have been, this past weekend, Palestinian actions in solidarity with Palestine in Cusco and throughout the Sacred Valley is actually what it's called, El Valle Sagrado.
Mm.
And this is, of course, Peru and most of Latin America is a heavily Catholic region. And so it's not been well received to have this influx of outsiders economically or culturally being described as we have heard Zionists be described throughout the world. I mean, I've had this conversation as somebody that travels a lot. Even before politics, I was always traveling, and I've heard so many different stories about Zionists from multiple people across the globe, the behavior, the entitlement,
Mm-hmm.
the arrogance. And I generally do not like to generalize people, but this has been a consistent rhetoric in terms of that. And that's exactly what these people have been saying. And I intend on going there soon, if not this month, the following month, to actually get a feel of what is exactly is happening, because there's so much concern and people are asking, for answers or what they can do to prevent what happened in Palestine to happen there, because it's not just in Peru. We're seeing the same concern in Argentina and Chile and Bolivia and Colombia as well. So that is what is happening on that end. And simultaneously, we know through the Honduras gate that we covered before that there is a coordinated effort between Zionist lobby and Israelis and Javier Milei, who loves Netanyahu and prays to his statue every day, that this is going to be the new home for Israel. And, we have the Shield of America that has been promoted heavily by Trump and the Trump administration and Marco Rubio, who are heavily basically saying outright that this is their land, that the United States extends into this. We've seen Trump mock this idea that Venezuela is going to be, the 51st state. And we have seen the eye turn once again to Cuba, which is still experiencing devastation, right? So what is happening in that context is not coincidental. I want people to understand that this is a deliberate, orchestrated objective to take over Latin America, both from Washington and Israel, which are essentially the united Epstein cabal. And apart from that, we have extremely important elections coming up in Colombia, by the way, Vanessa. And I have to say, I don't know if you know this, but the two candidates that are top right now in Colombia, one is Gustavo Petro's, who people say is his basically Gustavo Petro type of candidate that's going to be problematic for the United States. That's outright Palestinian, pro-Palestinian, outright anti intervention from the United States is going to be more of a problem. And the election is May 31st in Colombia for the first round. That guy is leading, very closely followed by a pro-Zionist far-right candidate. This is very reminiscent of Latin America, who wants to move the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem. So, and who is, and the third candidate in a row is also far-right and is part of an Israeli association. She's a board member of an Israeli association. So that's in Colombia. And so you have these two pivotal elections really happening almost simultaneously in Latin America. Colombia used to be a NATO partner. Colombia was, of course, one of the areas where people thought this is where the United States is going to be able to take control. That shifted with Petro, with the pushback from the people of Colombia. And so, it's very, this is it. Like, if this goes the wrong way, it'll just be so much easier for them to take over. Both Colombia and Peru are part of the Andes and the Amazon region. They're extremely pivotal for a lot of these resources: water, lithium, copper, just mining in general. So that's what's really happening on the radar. And of course, before I get into Bolivia, though, I just want to get your take on that, because we're talking about the very, very strong similarities between, say, like the Isaac Accords and the Greater Israel Project and the Abraham Accords and the Abraham Shield. So I just I find it really just frightening how I think there hasn't really been this connection, that it's essentially the same continuation of the same project.
Well, and I mean, in Africa, we know that they've expanded through Christian Zionism. I mean, I'd be quite interested if you get to some of those regions, because the one thing that is very noticeable here, they don't have, Israel itself, the population of Israel doesn't have the manpower to actually fully occupy the land that they're grabbing. So you're talking about southern Lebanon, you're talking about southern Syria in particular. Obviously, in the occupied territories, they've already reduced what is left of the Palestinian-owned, although all of it is Palestine, but what is allowed for the Palestinians, they've reduced it down to a sliver of their own territory, right? But what I'm kind of interested about is, where are these Jews or Israelis or Christian Zionists, where are they coming from? Are they coming from Israel to settle in Latin America? Are they coming from America, from the Jewish communities there? Are they coming from Europe? I mean, I'd just be really interested to find out, because that's why, to a degree, they've run these campaigns to terrorize the Druze communities in the south of Syria, so that effectively they will become, if you like, a protectorate of Israel, and they'll work as a proxy of Israel to settle on that land. The Kurds have also played that role. In Lebanon, of course, what they're hoping for is the allegiance of the Maronite Catholic Christians here, and some of the some of the Sunni Muslim communities and factions within Lebanon to actually support, just as Jolani is supporting their project, right, from inside Syria now. So I'm just interested in how they think they're going to populate all of these areas that they're taking over in the world. And I know that they're running, for example, in Cyprus, they're running education programs to effectively create the next generation of colonialist Zionist settlers, right? So, and that's just on Cyprus. So are they doing, it would be interesting to know if they're doing the same thing in Latin America, because fundamentally their biggest problem is the numbers to actually facilitate what they want to do from a expansion perspective. Of course, they can also use, I mean, it's an oxymoron in itself that you can't be Christian and Zionist, but the Christian Zionists, the fanatical Christians that believe in the Zionist prophecy, etc. But as far as I understand, they're still perceived as a lesser species than the Zionist supremacist Aryan because of the connections between the Nazis and the Zionist race. So I'd be really interested in how they're actually achieving what they're doing. Do you know what I mean? Like where are these Zionists coming from? What is their provenance, basically? Were they already in Latin America? Are they coming in from outside? And also, me as a British person, can I come and buy land in Peru or Bolivia or Argentina at the drop of a hat? If I had it, I wish I wouldn't be spending it to help the Zionists. But if I had $1 million, can I come to Patagonia, to Argentina, to Chile, and just achieve residency and buy land? So I guess those are my initial questions.
Yeah, so it would be really great to get more concrete answers on all of that. But what I do know for a fact is you can, as a foreigner, buy up land in Peru. There's really not a restriction. And I thought there was. There's more restrictions in, I think, in terms of like what is considered what is it? UNESCO, what is considered like
conservation areas.
But there, in terms of like, if you want to buy something, there isn't a barrier to that, which I think is a huge problem right now in terms of that, because there's obviously a lot of foreigners that are like, oh, well, this is really cheap, we can buy this, and then you price out, of course, the local population. But in reference to everything else you said, so the Chabad was established in 2006 in the Cusco Pasac region. So that's 20 years of its establishment, but it hasn't grown in this aspect until like the last couple years, since like 2024. And these are mainly Israelis that are coming in what is called it's Israeli travelers, mostly young, that are coming in from Israel, that it's mostly Israelis, but it's also you have the US diaspora, which is huge, right? The Israeli diaspora in the United States. And they're coming in as part of what's called the hummus trail, which is interesting because hummus isn't even their thing, but okay. and
Oh, yeah.
they're drawn to.
They stole that as well.
Yeah, they stole it. I hate it when people buy Israeli hummus because I'm like, that's not the real thing. But
Yeah.
so they're interested supposedly in the hiking aspect and like the psychedelic aspect. Like people do like drugs, and then they do like their plant medicine and whatever. Like that's
The
honestly what.
ayahuasca trials and so on.
I don't even know if it's ayahuasca, because ayahuasca is mostly in the Amazon, but I'm sure they have it. It's called like spiritual tourism of sorts. So they've been generally just doing that. But lately, the people are reporting that they're buying up more land, and they're establishing businesses, and they are feeling like they're owning the place, and that locals feel like they're being pushed out. So that's kind of what I really want to get to the bottom of, right? Because it's like that is not just, it hasn't, this didn't happen overnight, but now we're seeing kind of like an exacerbated event based on everything that's happening. And it's almost like this type of arrogance is now being rejected more vocally by people because of everything that they've done in Gaza, because of everything that the world is seeing. So it's people are becoming more confrontational against it. And I don't really see that these people, especially the people that live in this region who really, they do need tourism, but they don't necessarily like this type of tourism that seems more permanent to them, that seems more exploitative, and than somebody coming in from the US and just going to Machu Picchu and going home. This is like, oh, they're staying for a long time, they're building businesses. There was hundreds recently gathered in Israel, in Cusco, in the Chabad of Cusco, and this was, I think, in April, late April, and there was hundreds of Israelis that were gathered there. So this is like, it's weird because you don't really see that many. You see foreigners from all over the world, but to have hundreds of Israelis there in this era has been off-putting. So yeah, that's essentially what's gone on there. Now, the other aspect of the indigenous pushback is the Bolivian people that I think we've all seen have taken up. This is, I think, I don't know if it's it's been at least 8 days of protests, if not, no, yeah, 8 days of protests. Really started picking up on the 13th, but began on the 11th, against the austerity, against low wages, against the exploitation of the miners and the mining industry of Bolivia. Bolivia has the largest lithium deposits in the entire world, and these are located in the salt mines. And so the multinational corporations basically have taken over since the current president, who is, his name is Rodrigo Paz Pereira. And he is the president that came after there was that whole situation between, they barred Evo Morales from running. And then because he was running against Luis Arce, that was lost. The MAS lost the election, and in came this, pro-Zionist candidate who has asked Javier Milei for help. And Javier Milei is reportedly trying to send air defenses and tear gas to control the crowds of protesters, the majority of them being indigenous people who speak, Quechua, and who are basically saying, we don't want the multinationals to take our lithium. This is what they're saying outright. And they're also saying, we want the president to resign because he has failed in everything that he has said he would do. And we will not stop until he resigns. Now, this president was born in Spain, by the way. He's not even Bolivian. He was born in Spain. And so there are rumors that he may go back eventually to Spain and run away because he's scared. They're surrounding the presidential palace, and they've been pretty much, and you've seen the photos. It's inspiring, really. I mean, they have literally slingshots. They don't have weapons, and this is, again, it's that David versus Goliath. It's that, these people don't have the weapons, the military ability, and they're fighting back. And they mobilize thousands and thousands of people. The entire country is at a standstill, which, by the way, Americans in the United States, look at what happens when you actually do something to take, to demand your government does something different. This is, take note, because this is what the only way to do it. This is resistance. This is what we have in Latin America. And so they've been demanding his resignation, demanding the multinationals leave Bolivia, and that they don't steal the lithium, because apparently there's and this was exposed by Evo Morales, a deal between Argentina and the Zionist bloc of Argentina. This is how the Zionism is connected, to take this lithium away from Bolivia via these multinational corporations. And so they're standing up against that. Of course, they want better wages, of course, all of this, but it's bigger than that. And they understand this concept is so big. And then the other thing that happened was British Bolivian journalist Ali Vargas put out these leaked documents from the Bolivian police that leaked these documents that really exposed an operation planned with the DEA and some of the members of the Bolivian military and Bolivian police to kill and kidnap and kill former President Evo Morales. And so that was also a reason why people surrounded him and started protecting him, because they see him as, the leader that they respect still.
Do you think they were influenced by the kidnapping of Maduro to react in such a rapid way, or do you think that would have happened anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have happened anyway, but I do think there's we already kidnapped Maduro, and this is Venezuela. I mean, let's Venezuela had, far more capabilities, with as being an oil-rich country, but also its economy, even throughout history, was always bigger than what Bolivia's had. And Bolivia has largely been, one of the things about Bolivia and Peru both is that they have the largest indigenous ethnic population. So even more, where there's more of an indigenous, I don't want to say DNA profile, but that's essentially what it is. It's more people there in these countries have indigenous heritage. So that's one of the reasons why I think there's been this dismissal of these countries in particular. But it's also one of the reasons why you see, especially in Bolivia, a lot of these uprisings, right? This ability to organize and take control. But what I think is important about this whole situation is how the same type of strategy that we saw with Maduro, that we've seen thrown at pretty much anybody that's a threat to the hegemonic Trump administration, is this accusation of either, which is ironic, us being a sexual predator or being a narco trafficker. So they accused Evo Morales of being a sexual predator. They haven't been able to prove it, but the accusation is there, and it's promoted throughout pretty much all of the mainstream media and Latin American media that is bought. And they've accused him of this, which and you, of course, you have, if the Trump administration, or if anybody in the United States cared about pedophiles, they would start with the ones we have sitting in the White House. It's just ridiculous. But aside from that, they've accused him of being harboring narco trafficking and being a drug trafficker and all of this, without, of course, any sort of proof. But the thing about Bolivia is they produce coca. Okay, so they produce it's this leaf that the locals chew for energy and for altitude sickness.
It's similar to what they have in Yemen, I think, called kat.
Oh, is it?
Which is, because often you'll see Yemenis with kind of like a bulge in their cheek, and that's the kat. and it gives huge amounts of energy. It's I always remember, because there was a wonderful Yemeni academic. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but I interviewed him And he told me, I'll be with you in about an hour. I'm just having some cat with some friends, Q80. And the interview was hilarious. I literally couldn't. I mean, I didn't want to stop him talking, but it was supposed to be 1 hour. It went on for like 2.5 hours, and he was crying and he was laughing, and it was like, I don't know, he was hyper. I mean, it was
That's funny.
very, yeah. So it's probably probably a derivative or probably a similar natural stimulant, whatever. Because I mean, they survive on that. The fighters also.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Well,
you
I
look
got
at them; they're as skinny as anything, but they'll run across a desert twice under fire to go and rescue their comrades and so on. So I'm not saying it's only that gives them the
but it
ability to do
helps.
that, but it helps. Yeah.
It's funny. I've had like I don't chew on it, but usually when you go to Cusco, you consume it as a tea to help with the altitude sickness and to give you a little bit of like
Right.
energy. And then they make candies off of it too. But okay, so the DEA we know is the biggest drug trafficker in the world. And so when the DEA is involved, you know that they're trying to promote this idea that these people are drug addicts and they're producing cocaine from this, but who really is producing the cocaine, has always been historically the United States, because we have also a lot of consumers of that, and in the States. And so, yeah, of course they buy off people and they weaponize some of that because that is like an ingredient, right, in the production of cocaine.
Yeah.
But it's really not coming from Bolivia. This is an operation, but the fact that the DEA's name was mentioned there just really tells you exactly what they're going for. We saw the same thing happen in Ecuador a few months ago with them saying, "Oh, we gotta bomb Ecuador to save them from the narco traffickers." And this is of course being pushed heavily by Marco Rubio, who has he's got the biggest hard on for anti-communism. Like it's his thing. Like anything remotely left of center, he deems is a communist danger that needs to be put out. And really, there's really no communism anywhere in Latin America right now. What I would call that a more social collectivist type of government, but in the indigenous communities, which have historically been like this, by the way, this is
Yeah,
not
exactly.
anything new. This is like literally how they are, how they function. It's a resistance collectivist type of community
Yeah.
ideology, and it's very much like this. It's always been like that. So before even the United States existed. So, but they're using this excuse, and of course, it's no coincidence that the biggest amount of lithium is there, and Colombia or Bolivia is landlocked, but it has a lot of these resources, and it's up for grabs. The way they have threatened Evo Morales, and one of the things I always remember about Evo Morales was that day one, he was one of the only Latin American leaders, I think the only one, that actually flat out said the pandemic is it's a bioweapon.
Yeah, actually, I
And
do remember.
he was like, no, I'm not taking the vaccine. He was like, and this is actually, again, this is common in indigenous communities because they've been exploited, they've been experimented on. So this is why they
and
react this
also
way.
they have the remedies anyway, because I
Yeah.
remember, God, back in the 70s reading a book I found at a secondhand bookstore about this. I can't remember any of the names, but he was a well-known botanist who traveled around Latin America, met with the Aztecs and so on, and came back with the conclusion pharmaceutical companies are totally unnecessary. Like every single cure is among the plants, the earth, the fruits, everything. They already had cures for cancer, like AIDS. I mean, whatever AIDS was, basically. But they had cures for everything. And of course, this is another part of destroying these indigenous cultures. This is on behalf of the pharmaceutical industries. That's why they stopped naturopathy in the UK. It's illegal to sell natural remedies, as far as I know. It was quite a scandal a few years ago. Cannabis, which is the cannabis oil, which is known to be an enemy of cancer. And now suddenly, of course, the drug companies are starting to produce it, but it's going to be nowhere near the quality of some of the kind of homegrown cannabis oil or some of the less industrial manufacture cannabis oil that you could buy for medical treatment, right? So this is another part of it. It's not only the precious metals, the lithium, oil, water, whatever. It's also this. It's the destruction of our ability to heal ourselves. Even here in Lebanon, there are still, I've met a few people that still rely totally on plant medicine for snake bite, for scorpions, for like, because there are quite a few kind of weird creatures
that's
here.
so scary.
But you know, and it kind of, yeah, I haven't found one yet. I know our friend Marwa's husband was bitten and had to be rushed to the, not recently, but and I told you I found like a huge tarantula twice outside the front door. It's weird because in Syria you do have snakes in the mountains, and there are a couple of not very nice spiders, but it's pretty high up in the mountains, not in urban areas like here. Anyway, sorry, I digress slightly, but that's another that's another aspect of what they're doing. It's the destruction of all of these indigenous guys. It began in America, of course, you know, for them, for the Americans.
Yeah, and these are indigenous Americans after all. I mean, that's the ironic part, you know. It's like when you talk about the Shield of Americas, it's like, but these people are actually indigenous to the land. Like these are the people that have been here for, oh my gosh, civilizations. And again, it's the same story, right? I don't even call it neo-colonization, because that doesn't always imply, that implies that it's a little bit more covert. This is very overt. I mean, what they're doing is extremely overt. And again, you talked about how Israel doesn't have the enough people to like really, you know, promote this, but I think they're relying a lot on the diasporas, right? On the people that are across the world. And so this is where that sentiment of the takeover comes from.
And Shabbat, I mean, that's pretty much, what is it, 5,000 centers worldwide. You know, that was clearly what one of their roles was as the expansion mechanism for Zionism to basically establish, and they're pretty much in every country in the world. I mean, I remember someone scoffing at me when I said they do exist in China. It's not like China has escaped. And I can't remember exactly where they are there. I remember looking into it, but they do exist there. Okay, it's a relatively small movement, but I mean, that doesn't matter very much. They still have the influence and they have all the connections.
So yeah, it'll be left to be seen what, you know, happens. But I have a hard time thinking that in Bolivia they can last that long, because if the workers aren't going to work, the whole industry that keeps the country alive is frozen, and it's not producing. And then you have, the unfortunate thing is, you do have the beginnings of a civil war, because you have, you know, the government-backed military police forces facing off with the population. And by the way, they have been instructed to be able to use live ammunition by the president against the non-armed indigenous people that are, you know, with slingshots and stuff. And a lot of women, by the way, a lot of these ladies. One of the main pictures that I think everybody has seen is this indigenous woman just standing in the middle there. And so they're allowed to use these weapons. You know, Argentina wants to provide these tear gases and this air defenses, but what are they doing is they're moving tree trunks to prevent it. Yeah, against these people. Yeah. And so what are these people doing is they're putting out tree trunks to block it. These people are so small too. they're like under 5 feet, and you have all these
Yeah.
just it's absolutely, it's disgusting is what it is. And they're defending themselves. They're not, you know, budging it. We've seen Bolivia do this before. The last time I think it was 2019. So they are notorious for this, you know, and that's what we have. We, and nobody else and anybody else is in, you know, any Latin American country is doing this. It's really mostly the poorest indigenous communities doing this. And one thing to wrap this up, we saw two statements coming out from Washington and Israel, both exactly the same, basically saying that, you know, they condemn the violence against the government. They hope to restore democracy, and putting the onus, of course, on the people who are protesting, and basically saying the protests have caused the problem, when literally the protests wouldn't happen if the problems weren't already there. So it's really disgusting, and everybody has been putting them side by side, essentially saying these are two of the exact same statements. And what does that tell you? You know, is there any separation anymore between the United States and Israel when their statements are essentially the same exact thing? And why does Israel get to opine on the affairs of Bolivia? What does Israel have to do with Bolivia? Like, what is going on here? Why have we normalized having Israel's opinion on that?
It's insane. And I mean, so protests in Iran are good. Protests in Bolivia are bad. I mean, also we also have to bear that in mind. Protests are only good when they're backed and paid for by the US and Israel and the whole cabal, right? I also wanted to touch on some conversations that we've been having on Venezuela. And actually, I was talking to Ehsan Safinajad from Iran this morning about this also. And I have to say, he also expressed frustration at how people on social media are basically challenging some of his statements and basically telling him how Iran's strategy would be better run if Iran listened to their opinion. He was actually, surprisingly for him, he was actually a little bit more direct than that. And you know, he actually got quite angry. But I think this is an important point. And it'd be interesting to see what the audience think. But since Maduro was kidnapped, I know, and look, you and I privately have talked about our misgivings. We've it's not pleasant what is happening and what has happened in Venezuela, right? I'm in touch, obviously, with the Venezuela ambassador to Lebanon and Syria. I knew him in Syria from 2017, Jose Biomorgi. And if you go to his X feed, he's basically putting out what I'm going to say, which these claims, which came in almost immediately, and by the way, were supported by Russia, if you remember, almost within the first 24 hours, just as they did on Syria. Well, you know, why should we fight if the Syrian army surrendered? Which, by the way, I constantly and very vociferously push back against. But in Venezuela, having pretty much abandoned Venezuela to its fate, apart from supplying some man-pad air defense and so on, they didn't do a huge deal to help, neither did China. And Iran is a long way away. I mean, Iran had been, as far as I know, helping from an advisory perspective, as they did in Syria, to train some of the military and so on. But as I said, they're a long way away. It's very difficult. It's not like West Asia, where they can actually be proactively helpful towards their allies in the resistance. So there was this immediate blame game from Russia to say that there had been internal treason. And then people picked up on the Delcy Rodriguez, that she must have betrayed Maduro and so on. Now, my problem with this is that you have largely Americans going on social media and basically condemning Venezuela for what has happened since the kidnapping of Maduro, without any attempt to understand the predicament that Delcy Rodriguez and all of those that were close to Maduro are in. I mean, I was told there have been threats against all their lives. One, the ambassador has been very clear that there hasn't been good enough communication between the government now, as it is, Delcy included, and the kind of Chavista movement and the people that are really heavily against what is now happening with the US coming in and effectively, to a large degree, taking control, right? Mm-hmm. But to have absolutely no understanding of the complexity of the situation or of the duress that Venezuela is now under, or the fact that Venezuela, under an air campaign from the US, what will it do? It has no realistic air defense. It can possibly take down helicopters. It can't take down war jets. It can't stop, whatever, the huge bombs that they've been using in Gaza and in Iran. It can't. So you're talking about the slaughter of Venezuelans. If they were to try and reject any US interference in their affairs, potentially all of those that were close to Maduro would be assassinated, just as they've done here in Lebanon and Palestine and Iran and Iraq, actually, and attempted in Yemen. And so what I'm struggling with is, instead of pointing the finger at Venezuela, but these people don't say anything about China. They don't say anything about Russia. And are they proactively doing anything to, for example, dismantle the weapon manufacturing industry in their country, as we have seen in the UK by Palestine Action, and now there are new groups coming to the fore, like People for Genocide and so on, that are continuing the work of Palestine Action, right? So it's become a thing in the UK to do this, of which I'm proud of them for doing it, because that's direct action to actually stop at source the production of the weapons and the machinery and the mechanisms that are slaughtering people in this region and in Iran. I think the problem is that there is such a rush to judgment. There is such a rush to conspiratorial theorizing over what has gone on. And my problem is that this doesn't help the resistance. This actually effectively helps CIA and Mossad, because you're undermining the support for a country that is now in an incredibly difficult situation. The priority for many of them is to retrieve President Maduro. I know through negotiations, they've already achieved him being in at least a decent prison cell. Before, he was in horrible conditions. And the First Lady, the same. And the priority for them is basically to make sure he stays alive, and that they can get him primarily back to Venezuela, but if not, at least he can be sent to a country where he's safe, right? I mean, how many options does Venezuela have right now? That's, I guess, my point, right? And I know you and I have talked about it, and the options that are there for Venezuela. But yeah, I guess my point is, should we really be pointing fingers? It's like when people here said that, what's Hezbollah doing? 14 months and Israel is bombing and violating the ceasefire, and they're doing nothing. They're weak. They've lost after the fall of Syria and the assassination of Sayed Hassan Nasrallah. And look at them now. No one expected that. It's like Hassan said, people were criticizing him for saying they'll go after the Gulf states before they go after Israel. But when he explains it, the thing is that the people don't come in and say to him, can you explain why you're going after Gulf states first and then Israel? Isn't Israel like the head of the snake? But when he breaks it down and he explains it, they would understand. But they don't. They come in with this superiority attitude that, well, you're stupid because you're doing X, Y, Z, and you're not doing what we think you should do from a Western, Western perspective, with absolutely no skin in the game. So I don't know if I've kind of explained myself very well, but I just think that collectively in the West, it's not our job to tell the resistance how to resist or to suggest that they send themselves like lambs to slaughter. It's our job to actually prevent the slaughter by actually doing something in our own countries to prevent the manufacture of weapons, to prevent the infestation of the Zionist movement within government structures, to prevent the government going to war against these countries.
Mm. No, I fully agree. And I think that part of this problem is the fetishization of the US or Western, particularly US in this case, left, that loves to talk about, thinks they are extremely radical, and thinks they are they know what needs to be done because they're so-called communists or so-called socialists or so-called revolutionaries or whatever the hell they want to call themselves. And they live their life thinking that their opinions about this stuff is fact and that they know better because their ideals are, they believe in their ideals, which is fine, but they apply these ideals as like fact as to how other countries that are in circumstances that we have never been in the United States. We have never been on the end of bombs and sanctions and anything remotely close to what Venezuelans experienced for decades. And so when you come out and you say, Delcy Rodriguez is a traitor and Chavismo is done, Venezuela is done, Bolivarismo is done, that's it, they sold out, they're working with the CIA. It's like, well, if they were working with the CIA, then what's the point of consent? Like, it would have just been done in a different way. It doesn't make any sense even on the surface. But okay, but let's say even if what you say is true, there is no evidence presented, there's no deep analysis. It's just, I'm upset about this outcome. And so therefore the conclusion is this: I'm upset about this. Like everybody that cares about Venezuela and anti-imperialism and Chavismo is upset about this. It's the way Venezuela's sovereignty has been attacked, everything that's gone on. I went to Venezuela for an Alex Saab event. Of course I'm upset. I thought, hey, it was all about freeing Alex Saab. But there's so many things that we don't know during this whole thing that have happened. And I'm not going to pretend I know. And I'm not going to make vast and very serious conclusions that really affect a lot of people. And as you said, help the CIA and Mossad just because I'm upset about something. And I think on the internet, we just primarily see, the very reactionary takes that get a lot of support and like a lot of likes and a lot of this. So I think that's part of it. But there's no nuance. There's no, let's have a logical discussion as to what's going on here. And I do think that, yes, the Venezuelan government, as it stands, should have and could have and still can, PR-wise, at the very least, explain what is happening and keep more people in the loop and be more communicative as to what's going on so people don't make assumptions, because that's the natural human tendency, is get emotional about something, make an assumption, and then go off and tell everybody this. And that, but what really irks me is you have a bunch of people living in Europe or living in the United States telling a bunch of people in South America that they should have fought, that they should have gone up and fought against the United States, the largest military in the world, and that Maduro should have sacrificed his people, and they all should have died like fighting the United States. And how can you say that? Like, as somebody that hasn't even experienced a day without air conditioning, like, come on, be serious here. Be serious. Like, get off your little high horse. If the majority of these people would experience a fraction of what people all over the world experience, they would lose their shit. We're just not capable of that. Okay. You haven't seen or experienced it. I mean, most of us haven't. And that's something you have to be honest about. So how can you stand there from your comfort of your first world first world problems, so to speak, and then demand that, the Venezuelan people should do this or that because you think it's better? And I'm not saying I would have done exactly what Delcy Rodriguez is doing. I don't think anybody is sitting here defending every move that has been made by Venezuela or even agreeing with it. But I think it's their prerogative, it's their sovereign right to do it. And there's a lot of people that are on the ground in Venezuela right now that I know that are really upset with the way people are reacting and, saying you have no idea what you're talking about, and just spewing this information. It's getting picked up by people who don't know any better, and it's being spread, and it's really not helping Venezuelans at all. And so, it's been annoying. It's been really gross seeing it. And again, the last point I want to make here is that, as you said, this high standard that we have for Venezuela or for a lot of these Latin American countries is they're so scrutinized. If they make one mistake, and it's not just Venezuela, I also saw it with Hezbollah. I've seen it with Syria. I've seen it with pretty much any country south of the equator, or countries that are brown people there.
How many people said, "Oh, that's it, Syria's finished, dead. It's never going to come out," including George Galloway, or Ritter saying he spits on all Syrians who accept
or
it.
all Arabs.
What is this?
But where is the same outrage for China or Russia when they work with Israel? Where's that outrage? Why are they selling out to the Zionist lobby? Like, it's just. And although they're more powerful states, well, then you should, because they're more powerful states, shouldn't they?
Then they should do more against it.
Right. Yeah. So it doesn't make any sense to me that they have this double standard. And I think we've discussed this before, but it's really, really, really open right now, and how this is being portrayed. And by the way, the Bolivian people right now, okay, the indigenous communities, because a lot of people are saying, well, the people in Bolivia are fighting back. Yeah, they're fighting back, and they've done this before. This is what they do. This is their approach to this. And still, right now, they're not under a socialist government. They're under a right-wing U.S.-backed government, in spite of everything they've done. And they continue to do. They're fighting back, yeah. But you don't know that the Venezuelan people aren't going to fight back. You don't know that that this is it. You're assuming that. And you're just throwing it away when we have achieved absolute fuck all in the United States. Nothing. Exactly. We have AOCIA. That's the extent of your revolutionary achievement.
And Mamdani, you have Mamdani.
Oh yeah,
you're in Mamdani. Don't forget.
He's slightly better.
The great Muslim hope in the US. But no, I mean after Barack Obama, of course. But no, you have. I mean, I remember when Ritter kind of said, "Oh, that's it." The Palestinians basically brought it all on themselves. I'm paraphrasing, but he said something very akin to that. And when people say that to me, I'm just like, dudes, you fell for COVID. Like this isn't even 1% of the mind games and manipulation and infiltration and torture and abuse and all manner of MK Ultra shit that was thrown at this region in particular, right? You can't even handle a virus. Like, what the hell? And you want the people in this region, the people in Latin America, to suddenly figure it all out when you can't? Like, no, shut up. Really, sorry, but until you start actually doing something in your own country, if you're going to analyze, that's fine. If you're going to analyze and you're going to come to a conclusion and you can present the evidence and you can present the witness testimonies and you can present everything, that's why you and I go to the countries we talk about, right? I'm not going to go on social media and bang on about a country I've never visited. Like, I just wouldn't do it. because I don't understand the culture. I haven't been to the Sahel. I think Ibrahim Traore appears to be sort of another Thomas Sankara. Am I romanticizing that? Maybe. And I would love to go. So from that, I just look at it in a very kind of generic way, in a sense. I'm not going to say, why didn't he do this? Why is he letting Russia in? Why is he why is he taking money from the IMF? That's not my problem. It isn't. It isn't our problem. That's the whole point of sovereignty.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And if we're anti-imperialist, how can we interfere in a country's sovereign decisions? And if you're talking about Venezuela has been targeted, whose fault is that? It's not Venezuela's fault. It's the fault of the US government, the country you're living in. And what have you done to stop it? What have you done to stop the deportation of Venezuelan immigrants or US citizens that are Venezuelan that are being deported to San Salvador for torture and Guantanamo Bay style incarceration? Sorry, I'm just like
scratching my head. Yeah, this one. Yeah, it's but you know what? We're a minority here because the majority of people are reacting in this way. That I understand it to a degree. I get it. I understand that it looks really bad, but I think there's a lot of things again that you need to leave room for simmering. And if we're gonna give China and Russia some leeway as to how they handle things, why they didn't Russia didn't really help Syria, or why they didn't do this, why didn't they help Cuba, what's going on here? Why can't Venezuela get the same type of treatment is what I ask. Why are we expecting so much
or
from a
Syria,
country that's been attacked?
or Lebanon? It's why, or even Palestine from some quarters, as I've said. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is really, except I think, for me, the priority is to support the people that actually have the skin in the game, whether it's Iran or it's Hezbollah here in Lebanon, the Palestinians, the Syrians still, the Iraqi resistance, and so on. It's not, I don't think it's that difficult, really. But condemning them to room 101 just because they haven't reacted in a way that you think is correct for them. Yeah.
People are having
and
tantrums.
That's a problem on social media. It really is. It's I don't know, it's just descending into cartoon land on X in particular.
Yeah, X has gone down the drain, I guess. But I guess just for the sake of time, Vanessa, we're going to have to really, really touch on the Russia, China, Russia problem stuff, because that's a big, big thing. But I will say, circling back to how you touched on Trump, Beijing, Russia's meeting with China. And one of the things I want people to know for next time, this relationship between Russia and China is extremely lopsided, not towards Russia's favor. By the way, China, in my opinion, China does not look at Russia like an equal. I think there's a sense of Russia being, in a way, subordinate. They respect, of course, their approach is different than the United States. I'm not saying it's the same. It's definitely different. It's more of a back and forth. There's a respect, yes. But in terms of economic power, China's industries and Russia's industries, yes, they're interlinked, but also very much, for example, the Chinese get a better deal in terms of the price of wood, the trees that Russia has. In terms of the cars coming into Russia that are Chinese, there's a lot of Chinese cars in Russia. Those are priced okay compared to the rest of the cars, but the United States gets a nice deal. So does Latin America. There's lots of Chinese cars here in Peru. It's the potential that China has towards Russia. It's more of like Russia needs China more in this sense, especially with the sanctions, especially with a lot that's happened to Russia, the way it's been attacked by NATO, the way it's lost some of its markets. It's not as much of like, oh, this is great, the two are coming together, this is how it is. I think people have sort of romanticized that relationship as well. And if you talk to actual Russians, not expats and not people that are working for state media and are only going to tell you this perspective, but talk to just everyday Russian people, they're not exactly crazy about China either, because of a lot of things I'm talking about. It's very much favored towards their end, and that's something I definitely want to discuss and explore, and not to throw hate on China, but to just point out the reality of how these economic relationships exist, because all we get mostly from China and Russia, when you read the statements, it's just a lot of formalities, right? A lot of diplomatic verbiage, but you don't really get like the crux until sometimes you have to read the actual readout, and the readouts may differ depending on who says it. We saw that with Donald Trump and China, right? So that's just what I wanted to say on that.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see what the readouts say after Putin's visit, which is tomorrow, I think. But yeah, I agree with you. It's very lopsided, and I think when you see someone like Kirill Dmitriev put out a statement on X and Telegram saying, basically Trump has given him another golden goose, which is another month of no sanctions on Russian oil supply. But people are just not getting this fact that every month they have to go cap in hand to Trump to say, can you lift the sanctions for another month to keep our fiscal funds, our sovereign wealth fund afloat, basically, right? We've been talking about this. This isn't a position of strength. This is a position of weakness. When you're literally going to the aggressor, the largest military sort of part of the NATO complex, right? And you're having to go cap in hand to kind of literally beg for another month's reprieve on sanctions on your oil revenue to keep your revenue coming in, right? This really isn't a sign of strength. And I'm quite sure China is well aware of that. And China is very much a capitalist entity. I know we're going to get a ton of backlash for that, but I don't really care. But at the end of the day, they see opportunities. If they see a weakness anywhere, that's why they were buying discounted oil from Venezuela and Iran, because to a large degree, they were weak because of the sanctions. It's the same with Russia. Does China benefit from Russia being under financial pressure? Of course it does. Look at any corporate industry. That's what happens. But, on a much, much bigger scale with much higher risk stakes involved. But that's how I would look at it. If I were running a country and if a so-called partner country or ally were struggling and were weak, I would see it as an opportunity.
Yeah. And as a final note, I would,
not me personally, because I wouldn't, but what I'm saying is, as a government, you would.
Yeah. From that perspective. And I guess just, for a final note on this, just think about how many trillions of dollars these Silicon Valley, BlackRock, billionaires that went to meet Elon Musk, that went to meet with China. Why would they waste their time?
By the way, all of them.
Yeah, all of them, as you pointed out. Why would they waste their time if it's just going to be, formalities and stuff? This is business-minded, like a business-minded meeting, and China's not going to waste its time either. This is beneficial, and what I see in that meeting is that they're looking at each other as like, okay, we're competing, yes, but we're also the ones that have the power. I don't think Russia's included in that. I don't think Iran is included in that.
As a final thought, why on earth would you have a parade of little girls when you're welcoming the entire Epstein class to China? This is just
Somebody
beyond
fucked up
me. I
there.
mean,
It's bad PR move. Yeah, I don't get it. But yeah.
that was a little bit, and to hear Trump kind of, I think he mentioned the little girls 3-4 times in his talk, and I'm like, no, this is
Ah.
this is really not. Oh God, I don't know. I mean,
Anyway,
that's
on
an
the
aside,
pedophiles
but
note,
still.
that's yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much. This has been a fun one. I think we've laughed a lot on this one just because things are getting more ridiculous by the day. So, thank you for coming on this talk with us. Please don't hate us for ruining your dreams. We promise that there's some sort of light and some sort of tunnel somewhere. And yeah, we'll see you next time on Critical Perspective. Bye.
Take care. Bye.